The rain pattered against the windows of Luigi's, the Italian restaurant where I'd been working for the past 6 months. The gentle drumming created a soothing rhythm that almost drowned out the ache in my feet. 10-hour shifts as a waitress weren't kind to anyone, but especially not to a single mother trying to make ends meet. "Table 7 needs more bread," Marco, the head waiter, barked as he brushed past me, his cologne leaving a trail of sandalwood and something sharper, more expensive than anything I could afford. I nodded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind my ear. My once neat bun had started to come undone, wisps framing my face in what I hoped looked intentional rather than exhausted. The weight of the day, of every day, pressed down on my shoulders as I grabbed a fresh bread basket from the warming drawer. Luigi's wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect to find someone like me. With its crisp white tablecloths, crystal glasses that caught the light from ornate chandeliers, and a wine list that started at prices that made my stomach clench, it catered to Chicago's elite. But the tips were better than the diner where I'd worked before, and the manager didn't mind if I occasionally had to switch shifts when my babysitter canceled. "Sophia, he's here again." Lucia's voice was low as she sidled up next to me at the service station, her red lips curving into a knowing smile. A chill ran down my spine despite the kitchen's warmth. I didn't need to ask who he was. For the past 3 weeks, he had come in every Tuesday and Friday, always alone, always requesting the same corner table, number 12, that gave him a perfect view of the entire restaurant, and more specifically, of me. "Is it my section again?" I asked, already knowing the answer. It was always my section, no matter how Marco tried to rotate the floor plan. Lucia nodded, her eyes sparkling with a curiosity I couldn't share. "He specifically asked for you. Marco nearly had a stroke trying to explain that table 12 wasn't yours tonight. But the man just stared at him until he changed his mind. The bread in my hands suddenly felt too heavy. The basket too warm. I swallowed hard. "You know who he is, right?" Lucia whispered, leaning closer. "That's Dominic Russo." The name meant nothing to me, but the reverent way she said it told me it should. "He owns half of Chicago's North Side," she continued when I didn't respond. "My cousin Gino says that nothing moves in or out of the city without Russo knowing about it." My stomach twisted. A Mafia boss. Of course he was. This wasn't just any wealthy businessman. This was someone who dealt in power and fear. Someone dangerous. Here. Lucia reached up and tucked my hair more securely behind my ear, her fingers lingering for a moment. "He likes what he sees. Use it. His tips could pay your rent for a month." Before I could protest, she was gone, swept away by the Friday night rush, leaving me with a bread basket and a knot of dread. I took a deep breath and made my way through the dimly lit restaurant. The candles on each table cast shifting shadows across the faces of Chicago's wealthy, creating intimate pools of light where deals were made and secrets were shared. The smell of garlic and simmering tomato sauce wrapped around me like a familiar embrace, momentarily grounding me. And then I saw him. He sat exactly as he always did, back to the wall, facing the entrance. His suit was impeccably tailored, midnight black that somehow seemed darker than anything else in the room. He wasn't alone, not really. 2 men sat at a nearby table, pretending to be engrossed in their meals but alert in a way that regular diners weren't. Security. But it was his eyes that always caught me off guard. Dark as his suit, they tracked my movement across the restaurant with the focus of a predator. Not leering, like some of the businessmen who had too much wine. No, his gaze was calculating, assessing, possessive. I approached his table, forcing my hands to remain steady as I set down the bread basket, though I hadn't been asked for it. A mistake. A small one, but still a deviation from the script. "Good evening, Mr. Russo," I said, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. "Would you like to start with the usual Barolo?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, that I knew his name, or that I remembered his wine preference. "You know who I am." His voice was lower than I expected, a rough velvet that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. It wasn't a question. I hesitated. Denying it would be a lie, and something told me he would know. My coworker mentioned it. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something that suggested amusement. "And what else did your coworker mention, Sophia?" The sound of my name on his lips sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I'd never told him my name, but he wore it like he owned it already. Nothing important, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. This time he did smile, a slow, deliberate thing that transformed his harsh features into something almost handsome, almost human. The Barolo would be perfect, he said finally, his eyes never leaving mine. And I'll have the ossobuco tonight. I nodded, scribbling on my pad though I had no need to. It was just something to do with my hands, somewhere to look besides his face. Bring yourself a glass as well, he added as I turned to leave. Join me for a moment when you can. It wasn't a request. I made it to the kitchen before my composure cracked. My hands trembled as I placed his order, the chef giving me a curious look that I ignored. The weight of Dominic Russo's gaze seemed to follow me even through the solid kitchen doors. He asked you to join him, didn't he? Lucia appeared at my side again, her expression a mix of envy and concern. I nodded, unable to form words. Listen to me. She gripped my arm, her long nails digging in slightly. Be careful, but don't be stupid. Men like Russo. They can change your life with a snap of their fingers, for better or worse. The warning in her voice was clear, but so was the implication. This could be an opportunity, the kind that didn't come along for women like me, women with too many bills and too little time. I thought of my daughter, Emma, probably already asleep at Mrs. Petrovich's apartment downstairs. I thought of the eviction notice that had appeared under my door 3 days ago, giving me 2 weeks to come up with 3 months of back rent. I thought of Emma's asthma medication, the cost rising every month. I'll be careful, I promised, though I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The night progressed in a blur of orders and plates and practiced smiles. Throughout it all, I felt him watching me. As I served other tables, as I laughed at an elderly couple's joke, as I bent to pick up a dropped napkin. Always watching, tracking my movements like I was the only person in the room. Finally, during a lull, Marco nodded at Russo's table, his expression making it clear that I shouldn't keep our most valued customer waiting. With a fresh glass of wine in hand, I approached table 12 again. Sit. Dominic gestured to the chair across from him. I hesitated for only a moment before sinking into the seat, acutely aware that I was now eye level with him. This close, I could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the faint scar that ran along his jaw, the signet ring on his right hand that gleamed gold in the candlelight. You're afraid of me, he stated, swirling the dark red wine in his glass. The directness startled a laugh out of me. Shouldn't I be? His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the only indication that he found my response amusing. Most people have the sense not to admit it. I'm not most people. The words slipped out before I could stop them, too honest for this dangerous game. No, he agreed, his gaze intensifying. You're not. The silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken words and implications. I took a sip of wine to steady myself, the rich flavor exploding on my tongue. It probably cost more than I made in a day. You have a daughter, he said abruptly. My blood turned to ice. How do you... I make it my business to know things, Sophia. He leaned forward slightly, his presence suddenly filling my entire world. Just as I know about your eviction notice, your daughter's medical bills, the fact that you work a second job 3 mornings a week at a coffee shop downtown. Fear clawed at my throat, making it hard to breathe. Are you threatening me? For the first time, he looked genuinely surprised, quite the opposite. Before he could elaborate, a commotion at the restaurant entrance drew our attention. A man burst in, his expensive suit rumpled, his movements erratic. Even from across the room, I could see the wild look in his eyes as they scanned the restaurant, finally landing on our table. Dominic's posture changed instantly, the casual elegance replaced by coiled tension. One of his security men was already moving to intercept the newcomer, but the man evaded him with surprising agility. "Russo!" he shouted, his voice slurring slightly. Drunk or high or both. You think you can just take everything? The restaurant fell silent, the clinking of glasses and murmur of conversation snuffed out like candle flames. I started to rise, instinctively wanting to get away from whatever was about to unfold, but Dominic's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising gentleness. "Stay where you are," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're safer here." The drunk man was still advancing, the security guard now flanking him, but seemingly unsure whether to make a scene by physically restraining him. "Sir, perhaps we should—" I began, but Dominic's grip tightened slightly in warning. "Tony!" Dominic called, his voice carrying effortlessly across the restaurant. "This isn't the place." "You took everything from me," the man, Tony, spat back. "My territory, my men, my—" He broke off, choking on the words. Something dark passed over Dominic's features. "Your brother made his choice." Tony's face contorted with rage. His hand plunged into his jacket pocket, and several things happened at once. Dominic moved with shocking speed, shoving the heavy table onto its side in a crash of glass and porcelain. His other hand pulled me down and behind the makeshift barrier as a deafening crack split the air. Screams erupted from around the restaurant as patrons dove for cover. I found myself pressed against Dominic's chest, his body shielding mine completely as another shot rang out. The smell of his cologne, sandalwood and spice, and something uniquely him, filled my senses as his heartbeat thundered against my ear. Surprisingly steady despite the chaos, and then it was over. The security guards had Tony pinned to the floor, a small pistol kicked away across the polished hardwood. Dominic's hand cradled the back of my head, his fingers tangled in my hair that had completely fallen from its bun during the commotion. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough as he pulled back just enough to scan my face. I shook my head, too shocked to speak. He helped me to my feet as his men dragged Tony out through the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of the other diners who were now cautiously emerging from under tables. The restaurant manager was already apologizing profusely, offering free drinks, trying to restore normalcy. But nothing would be normal again, because as Dominic's hand remained firmly at the small of my back, I realized with perfect clarity that whatever game I thought we were playing had real, possibly deadly stakes, and I had just been pulled into the center of it through a horrible twist of fate, or perhaps an act of misguided courage, when I'd accidentally served the most dangerous man in Chicago and caught his eye. As sirens wailed in the distance and Dominic leaned down to whisper in my ear, I knew my life had changed irrevocably. "It seems we need to have a longer conversation, Sophia," he said, his breath warm against my skin. "One that can't happen here. And God help me, despite everything, despite the fear and the chaos and the shattered glass at our feet. A part of me wanted nothing more than to follow him into the darkness." The aftermath of the shooting passed in a blur of police sirens, witness statements, and shocked patrons being escorted out of the restaurant. I found myself seated in Luigi's office, a shock blanket around my shoulders that someone had thoughtfully provided, though I wasn't cold. My hands cradled a cup of tea that had long since gone lukewarm. "Miss Romano?" A detective with tired eyes and a rumpled suit appeared in the doorway. "We're just about finished. Do you need someone to escort you home?" Before I could answer, a shadow fell across the room as Dominic Russo appeared behind the detective. Despite the chaos of the evening, he looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, his suit barely wrinkled. "My driver will take her home," Dominic said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The detective's posture stiffened slightly, but he only nodded. "Of course, Mr. Russo." He turned back to me with a forced smile. "If you remember anything else, please call the number on this card." I accepted the business card with numb fingers, watching as the detective retreated with one last wary glance at Dominic. The power dynamics were painfully clear. Even the law stepped carefully around Dominic Russo. "Come." Dominic extended his hand to me. It's been a long night. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to call a cab, to get as far away from this man as possible. But the image of the eviction notice flashed in my mind, followed by Emma's small face as she struggled to breathe during her last asthma attack. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and secure, as he guided me through the now empty restaurant. The aftermath of the violence was still evident. Overturned chairs, shattered glass that crunched beneath our feet, the metallic scent of spilled wine mingling with something more acrid. Yet Dominic moved through it with the ease of a man accustomed to walking through wreckage. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the night air remained heavy with moisture. A sleek black car idled at the curb, its windows tinted so dark they reflected the streetlights like obsidian mirrors. A broad-shouldered man in an equally dark suit held the rear door open, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "This is unnecessary," I said, finding my voice at last. "I can take the bus." Dominic's expression hardened. "A woman was nearly shot because she was sitting with me. You're not taking the bus." The bluntness of his statement sent a fresh wave of fear through me. He was right. I could have died tonight, not because of anything I'd done, but simply because I was in his orbit. I slid into the back seat of the car, the leather cool and buttery soft against my skin. Dominic followed, settling beside me with a grace that belied his size. The door closed with a soft thud that somehow sounded like finality. "Your address?" he asked as the car pulled away from the curb. I hesitated before giving it, knowing I was revealing yet another piece of myself to this dangerous man who already seemed to know too much. The car moved smoothly through the late-night Chicago streets, the driver navigating with silent efficiency. "The man tonight," I said after several minutes of tense silence. "Who was he?" Dominic's gaze shifted from the window to my face. "Someone who blamed me for his brother's poor choices. And did you," I pressed, surprising myself with my boldness, "have something to do with his brother?" A muscle ticked in Dominic's jaw. "His brother worked for me. He decided to steal from me and sell information to a rival organization." He spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather rather than what I assumed had ended in someone's death. "And now his brother wants revenge." "Tony Visconti is a desperate man making desperate decisions," Dominic said. "He won't be a problem after tonight." The casual certainty with which he dismissed Tony's future sent a chill down my spine. "You're going to kill him," I whispered. Dominic's eyes narrowed. "Is that what you think of me, Sophia? That I solve all my problems with bullets?" I met his gaze steadily. "I don't know what to think of you." Something shifted in his expression. A softening around the edges, perhaps, or a flash of respect. "Tony will be leaving Chicago tonight. His brother's debt has been paid, and I've made arrangements for him to start fresh elsewhere. Sometimes mercy makes a more lasting impression than violence." The car slowed as we entered my neighborhood, a stark contrast to the gleaming downtown district we'd left behind. Here, the buildings were older, worn by time and neglect. Laundry hung from fire escapes, and a group of teenagers lingered on a corner despite the late hour. "This is where you live?" Dominic asked, his voice carefully neutral. I bristled at the implied judgment. "Not all of us have half of Chicago's North Side." To my surprise, a genuine smile curved his lips. "Touché." The car stopped in front of my apartment building. Even in the darkness, the peeling paint and cracked front steps were visible. Dominic's driver immediately exited, opening my door and scanning the area with practiced vigilance. "Wait," Dominic said as I moved to get out. He reached inside his jacket, and I tensed instinctively, but what he withdrew was an envelope, thick and cream-colored. For the inconvenience tonight, I stared at the envelope, understanding exactly what it was. "I don't want your money. It's not a bribe, Sophia. It's compensation for a traumatic experience that was my fault." His eyes held mine. "For your daughter's medication, perhaps, or to hold off that eviction notice." The mention of Emma made my heart clench. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when my daughter's well-being was at stake. Still, I hesitated. "There are no strings attached," he added, as if reading my reluctance. "Though I would like to see you again, under better circumstances." I reached for the envelope slowly, feeling as though I were crossing some invisible line. "Why me?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me since he first started coming to Luigi's. "Why do you keep coming back?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Because when you smile, truly smile, not the one you give to customers, it reaches your eyes in a way I haven't seen in a very long time." His voice had dropped lower, more intimate. "Because you treat everyone the same, whether they're the dishwasher or the mayor who dined at table 4 last week. Because despite everything weighing on you, you haven't let it break you." His words wrapped around me, unexpectedly warm in the cool night air. No one had seen me, really seen me, in so long. I'd become accustomed to being invisible, a ghost moving through other people's evenings, serving their food, refilling their glasses, existing only at the periphery of their awareness. "You don't know me," I said, though the words lacked conviction. "I want to," he replied simply. The directness of his answer left me speechless. Before I could formulate a response, the sound of a window opening above us drew my attention. "Sophia, is that you?" Mrs. Petrovich's voice called down. "Emma's been asking for you." She woke up with a cough. Concern immediately overrode everything else. "I'll be right up," I called back, already moving toward the building's entrance. Dominic stepped out of the car, his tall frame illuminated by the streetlights. "Go to your daughter," he said. "But this conversation isn't over." I nodded, clutching the envelope to my chest. "Thank you for the ride. Sophia." He caught my arm gently as I turned to leave. "Lock your doors tonight." The warning in his voice made my stomach knot. "Do you think—" "It's just a precaution," he assured me. "I'll have someone watching the building tonight, but still, be careful." The idea of being watched should have frightened me, but instead, I felt an odd sense of security. "Good night, Mr. Russo. Dominic," he corrected, his fingers lingering on my arm for a moment longer than necessary. "After tonight, I think we're well past formalities." I hurried up the crumbling steps and into the building, feeling his eyes on me until the door closed behind me. Only then, in the dim light of the dingy hallway, did I allow myself to open the envelope. What I saw made me gasp. There was enough cash inside to cover 6 months of rent, with plenty left over. Clipped to the money was a business card with just a phone number, no name. On the back, in bold, slashing handwriting, "If you need anything, anytime." I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. In one night, my life had veered wildly off course. I had witnessed violence, been protected by one of Chicago's most dangerous men, and now held in my hands the solution to my most pressing problems. But at what cost? Mrs. Petrovich's door opened as I reached the second floor. "Thank goodness you're home," she said, her accent thick with worry. "Emma's fever came back, and her breathing isn't good." All thoughts of Dominic Russo fled as I rushed to my daughter's side. The night's strange events would have to wait. Right now, Emma needed me. Hours later, after I'd given Emma her medication and sat with her until her breathing eased and she fell into a peaceful sleep, I stood at the window of our small apartment, looking down at the street below. The black car was gone, but a different one had taken its place. Dark and unobtrusive, but unmistakably watching. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something dangerously close to anticipation stir within me. Whatever game Dominic Russo was playing, I was now a participant, willing or not. And as I finally crawled into bed as dawn began to break over Chicago's skyline, I couldn't help but wonder what the next day would bring. Morning came too soon, sunlight filtering through the thin curtains of our one-bedroom apartment. I'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep, my dreams haunted by gunshots and dark, intense eyes. Emma was still sleeping, her breathing finally even after a rough night. I watched her for a moment, her small chest rising and falling. Dark curls splayed across the pillow. She was the one pure thing in my life. The reason I pushed through each exhausting day. I made coffee in the kitchenette, the familiar ritual grounding me after the surreal events of the previous night. The envelope from Dominic sat on the counter where I'd left it, its presence both a relief and a burden. I'd counted it 3 times before finally falling asleep. Enough money to solve my immediate problems, and then some. A lifeline I desperately needed, but was afraid to grasp. A soft knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw not who I feared, or perhaps secretly hoped for, but a delivery man holding a large paper bag. "Delivery for Sophia Romano," he said when I cracked the door, chain still in place. "I didn't order anything," he shrugged, looking bored. "Already paid for. From Caravelli's Bakery." Caravelli's was an upscale Italian bakery in the Gold Coast neighborhood, somewhere I'd never been able to afford. I accepted the bag with hesitant thanks and closed the door, setting it on the kitchen counter with suspicion. Inside was an assortment of pastries. Still warm cornetti, chocolate-filled bomboloni, and delicate sfogliatelle that flaked at the slightest touch. Nestled among them was a small card with the same bold handwriting from last night. "For you and Emma. I took the liberty of calling Luigi's. Your shifts are covered for the next 3 days. Rest, D." I stared at the note, emotions warring inside me. The presumption of it, arranging my work schedule without consulting me, should have infuriated me. Instead, a treacherous warmth spread through my chest at the thoughtfulness. 3 days to recover, to be with Emma, to not worry about juggling everything for just a little while. Mommy? What's that smell? Emma padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her favorite stuffed rabbit dragging behind her. Breakfast, I said, pushing aside my complicated feelings to smile at my daughter. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Better. She climbed onto one of our mismatched kitchen chairs, eyes widening at the sight of the pastries. Are those for us? I nodded, selecting a cornetto for her and placing it on a plate. A friend sent them. Which friend? She bit into the pastry, her expression melting into delight as the buttery layers dissolved on her tongue. Someone from work. It wasn't exactly a lie. Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation, happily demolishing her breakfast. I watched her, marveling as always at her resilience. At 5 years old, she'd already endured more than some people faced in a lifetime. Her father's abandonment before she was born, the constant moves as I struggled to keep us afloat, the frightening asthma attacks that had started last year. The image of Tony Visconti's gun flashed in my mind. What if something had happened to me last night? What would become of Emma? Mommy, you're squishing your pastry, Emma said, pulling me from my dark thoughts. I looked down to see I'd crushed the sfogliatella in my hand, flaky pastry crumbling between my fingers. Just clumsy, I said with a forced laugh, brushing the crumbs into a napkin. After breakfast, I helped Emma dress for the day, grateful that she seemed to have recovered from last night's asthma flare-up. With unexpected free time stretching before us, I suggested we visit the park a few blocks away, something we rarely got to do together because of my work schedule. As we left the apartment, I couldn't help scanning the street, looking for the car from last night. It was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Was this how it would be now? Always looking over my shoulder, wondering if Dominic's eyes, or those of his men, were on me. The park was busy with morning joggers and mothers with strollers. Emma ran to the playground, immediately making friends with a girl her age on the swings. I sat on a nearby bench, the spring sunshine warm on my face despite the lingering chill in the air. Ms. Romano. I jumped at the voice beside me. A man had sat down, slender, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a scholarly appearance. He didn't look like one of Dominic's men, but the way he'd appeared so silently beside me set off warning bells. Who are you? I asked, already half rising, ready to grab Emma and run. Please, don't be alarmed. His voice was calm, almost soothing. My name is Gabriel. I work for Mr. Russo in various capacities. I sank back onto the bench, keeping my eyes on Emma. What do you want? Just to deliver a message. He followed my gaze to the playground. Your daughter seems well today. I understand she had a difficult night. The casual reference to Emma's health made my blood run cold. Are you threatening my child? My voice was low, but fierce. Gabriel looked genuinely startled. Of course not, Mr. Russo was concerned when he heard about her condition. He's asked me to provide you with this. He handed me a business card. Dr. Alessandra Moretti, the finest pediatric pulmonologist in Chicago. She's expecting your call. I stared at the embossed card. I can't afford a specialist. That's been taken care of, Gabriel said simply. No bills will come to you. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt a surge of frustration. I don't need charity. Gabriel's expression remained impassive. Mr. Russo doesn't offer charity, Ms. Romano. He values you, for reasons I'm not privy to, and when Dominic Russo values something, he protects it. He stood, straightening his immaculate suit. The appointment is for tomorrow at 10 a.m., should you choose to accept it. A car will come for you at 9:30. And if I don't accept it? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That is, of course, your choice, but consider your daughter. With that, he walked away, leaving me clutching the business card so tightly its edges cut into my palm. I watched Emma laughing on the swings, her dark curls bouncing in the sunlight. What mother wouldn't move heaven and earth for her child? But this was something else entirely. Accepting Dominic's money had been one thing, a one-time transaction, a compensation, as he'd put it. This was ongoing involvement, a debt that would keep growing with no clear way to repay it. Yet looking at Emma, remembering the terrifying nights when her small body struggled for breath. How could I refuse? The rest of the day passed in a haze of indecision. Emma and I spent the afternoon watching movies on our secondhand TV, ordered pizza for dinner, a rare treat, and I read her 3 stories at bedtime instead of the usual one. Small luxuries made possible by the envelope still sitting on my counter, tempting me with its promise of security. After Emma fell asleep, I paced our small living room, Gabriel's card burning a hole in my pocket. Finally, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on Dominic's card from last night. He answered on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting for my call. Sophia. Just my name, spoken in that deep voice that somehow contained a caress. The doctor, I said without preamble. Your man said you'd arranged it. Gabriel can be abrupt, but he's loyal. There was a pause. Will you take Emma to see Dr. Moretti? Why are you doing this? The question burst from me, all the confusion and frustration of the past 24 hours pouring into the words. Silence stretched between us, filled only with the sound of his breathing. I told you last night. I see you, Sophia. In a world of people looking to take, you only give. To your daughter, to the customers at Luigi's, to that old woman in apartment 2B who you bring groceries to each week. I inhaled sharply. How long had he been watching me? How much did he know? I'm not asking for anything in return, he continued, considerate. Balancing the scales for putting you in danger last night. And after the appointment, what then? I could almost hear his smile through the phone. Then, I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere you don't have to serve the food. Despite everything, a laugh escaped me. Is this how you normally court women? Arranging medical care for their children? There's nothing normal about this situation, Sophia. His voice had dropped lower, sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. Or about how I feel when I'm with you. The raw honesty in his words caught me off guard. This dangerous man, this mafia boss who commanded fear and respect throughout the city, was laying himself bare to a waitress from the wrong side of town. The car will come tomorrow, I said finally. For the appointment. Thank you. The relief in his voice was palpable. And dinner? I hesitated, knowing I was standing at a precipice. One step at a time. Always cautious, he murmured. It's what keeps you alive. Is that a warning or an observation? Both. The single word carried weight. Get some rest, Sophia. I'll be in touch. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone, wondering what I'd just agreed to. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept replaying Dominic's words, the feeling of his body shielding mine during the shooting, the way his eyes followed me across the restaurant. Something was happening between us. Something dangerous and exhilarating that made my heart race even as my mind screamed caution. Morning arrived with another delivery. This time a small package containing an inhaler for Emma, newer and more effective than the generic one her current insurance covered, along with a note, for emergencies. The car will arrive at 9:30. D. The black car pulled up precisely at the appointed time. The driver, a different man from last night but cut from the same cloth, broad-shouldered, vigilant, dressed in understated black, opened the door for Emma and me without a word. Where are we going, Mommy? Emma asked, wide-eyed at the leather seats and built-in tablet that was already playing her favorite cartoon. To see a special doctor, I explained, helping her with the seatbelt. She's going to help with your breathing. As the car pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure across the street. Gabriel, watching us depart. Our eyes met briefly before he melted back into the crowd. The appointment with Dr. Moretti was unlike any medical visit we'd ever experienced. The doctor herself was warm but efficient, conducting a thorough examination of Emma's lungs and explaining everything in terms both of us could understand. She prescribed a new medication regimen, arranged for a follow-up in 2 weeks, and gave me her personal cell number for any concerns, day or night. Not once was payment mentioned. When I tried to bring it up at the reception desk, the nurse just smiled and said everything had been taken care of. As we left the medical building, the same black car waited at the curb. But this time, the back door opened to reveal Dominic himself, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. Dominic, I said, stopping short, suddenly conscious of my simple jeans and sweater. Sophia. His eyes moved from me to Emma, who partially hid behind my legs. His expression softened as he crouched down to her level, "You must be Emma," he said, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "I'm a friend of your mother's." Emma studied him with the unfiltered curiosity of a child. "You have a nice car." A genuine smile transformed Dominic's face, erasing the hard edges and making him look almost boyish. "Thank you. Would you and your mother like to join me for lunch?" Emma looked up at me questioningly. I hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected invitation and the strange tableau we presented: the Mafia boss, the waitress, and the little girl on a Chicago sidewalk in spring. "Please, Mommy." Emma tugged at my hand. "I'm hungry." Looking at Dominic's expectant face, I realized I'd been tumbling toward this moment since the first time he walked into Luigi's and fixed those dark eyes on me. One way or another, our paths were now intertwined. "Lunch would be lovely," I said, taking the hand he offered and stepping into the car, into whatever future awaited us. Lunch was at a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a tree-lined street in Lincoln Park. Not ostentatious like Luigi's, but authentic in a way that spoke of generations of family recipes. The owner greeted Dominic like a long-lost son, kissing both his cheeks and exclaiming over Emma, who beamed at the attention. No one questioned why someone like Dominic Russo was dining with someone like me. Here, it seemed, he wasn't a mafia boss, but simply a valued patron. We were seated in a private corner booth, the red checkered tablecloth and candle in a wine bottle giving the space a cozy, intimate feel. Emma was delighted when the owner's wife brought her crayons and paper, keeping her occupied while Dominic and I talked. "The doctor was impressed with how well Emma handled herself," Dominic said, pouring me a glass of water from the carafe on the table. "She said Emma is very brave." I watched my daughter as she concentrated on her drawing, tongue poking out between her lips. "She's had to be," I said softly. Dominic's eyes were intent on my face. "Her father?" The question was gentle but direct. I hesitated, then decided that after everything that had happened, half-truths would serve no purpose. "He left when I told him I was pregnant," I said, tracing a pattern on the tablecloth. "Emma has never met him, and he's never asked to meet her." Something dark flashed across Dominic's face. "His name?" "Why?" I asked, suddenly wary. "So you can track him down? Teach him a lesson about responsibility?" Would that be so terrible? There was no humor in his smile. "Yes," I said firmly. "He made his choice. Emma and I have managed without him." "At what cost to you?" Dominic leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "I've seen you, Sophia, working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, stretching every dollar until it screams. You deserve more. And you're offering to provide it?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "In exchange for what?" For the first time, Dominic looked genuinely taken aback. "Is that what you think this is, a transaction?" I glanced at Emma, ensuring she was still absorbed in her drawing before continuing. "I don't know what this is," I admitted. "Men like you don't notice women like me without a reason." "Men like me," he repeated, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "You've already decided who I am based on rumors and speculation." "You didn't deny being what Lucia called you, a mafia boss," I countered. "Would you have believed me if I had?" He held my gaze steadily. "We all have labels, Sophia. I'm sure people have labeled you as well. Single mother, waitress, struggling. Do those encompass everything you are?" His words hit uncomfortably close to home. How many times had I been dismissed, overlooked, defined by my circumstances rather than my character? "You're right," I conceded. "I'm sorry." Dominic's expression softened. "I'm not asking you to ignore what I am or what I've done. I'm just asking for the chance to show you who I am beyond the rumors." Before I could respond, our food arrived, a parade of dishes that made Emma's eyes widen in delight. For a while, conversation gave way to the simple pleasure of the meal. I watched as Dominic patiently showed Emma how to twirl spaghetti on her fork, the tender way he wiped sauce from her chin with his napkin, the genuine laugh that escaped him when she told a silly knock-knock joke. This man who commanded fear and respect throughout Chicago was gentle with my daughter in a way that made something inside me ache. "Mr. Dominic, are you my mommy's boyfriend?" Emma asked abruptly, with the unfiltered directness only children possess. I choked on my water, but Dominic merely smiled. Would you mind if I was? Emma considered this seriously, studying him with narrowed eyes. Do you make her smile? Daddy didn't make her smile. That's why he went away. My heart clenched at her simplified understanding of her father's abandonment, at the protective instinct behind her question. Emma, I began, but Dominic held up a hand. That's a very good question, he told her solemnly. Making someone smile is very important. I hope I do make your mother smile, and I promise to try my best to keep doing so. Emma nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her dessert, a towering gelato creation that she had no hope of finishing. I'm sorry, I said quietly. She doesn't usually interrogate people. Don't apologize. She's protecting you. His eyes were warm as they met mine. She loves you very much. She's everything to me, I said simply. Dominic nodded, understanding in his gaze. Family is everything. After lunch, despite my protests that we could take the bus, Dominic insisted on driving us home. Emma fell asleep almost immediately in the car, worn out from the excitement of the day. She likes you, I said, watching my daughter's peaceful face as she slumbered against my side. High praise, Dominic replied with a smile that transformed his face. Children are excellent judges of character. Then what does that say about her father? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Dominic's expression darkened. It says he's a fool who doesn't deserve either of you. The conviction in his voice warmed something inside me that had been cold for a very long time. When was the last time someone had defended me, had been indignant on my behalf? I'd grown so used to handling everything alone that the sensation was almost foreign. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow night? He asked as the car pulled up to my apartment building. Just the two of us. I hesitated, glancing at Emma. I don't have a babysitter. Mrs. Petrovich would be happy to watch her, I'm sure. At my surprised look, he added, I may have spoken to her briefly while you were getting ready this morning. The idea of Dominic chatting with my elderly neighbor should have been amusing, but it only underscored how thoroughly he'd inserted himself into my life in the span of a few days. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I try to. His voice was serious now, his eyes intent on mine. When something matters to me, I leave nothing to chance. The implication hung in the air between us. I mattered to him. This wasn't just a passing interest or a game to alleviate his boredom. Okay, I said finally. Dinner tomorrow. His smile was immediate and transformative, softening the hard edges of his face. I'll send a car at 7. That night, after settling Emma with a movie, I stood in front of my closet, staring at the meager selection of clothes. Nothing I owned would be appropriate for the kind of place Dominic Russo would frequent. The nicest thing I had was the black dress I wore for waitressing at Luigi's, and the thought of wearing my work uniform on a date made me cringe. A date. The word sent a flutter of nerves through my stomach. When was the last time I'd been on a proper date? Before Emma, certainly. 5, maybe 6 years ago. The knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Half expecting another delivery from Dominic, I was surprised to find Gabriel standing there, a large garment bag draped over his arm. Ms. Romano? He greeted with a slight nod. Mr. Russo thought you might appreciate some options for tomorrow evening. He handed me the garment bag, which was heavier than I expected. There are 3 dresses inside, Gabriel continued. Different styles. All your size. Choose whichever you prefer, or none at all if that's your wish. The shoes are in the box. He gestured to a glossy shopping bag I hadn't noticed at his feet. This is, I began, but he cut me off with a raised hand. Mr. Russo was very clear that this is not an obligation but an option. He said, and I quote, "Tell her she's beautiful in anything, but she deserves to feel special." Gabriel's expression remained impassive, but I thought I detected a hint of amusement in his eyes. He can be quite poetic when it comes to you. After Gabriel left, I unzipped the garment bag with trembling fingers. Inside were 3 dresses that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. A deep emerald silk that would highlight my eyes, a classic black that was worlds away from my waitress uniform, and a burgundy wrap dress that looked both elegant and comfortable. Tears pricked at my eyes unexpectedly. Not because of the extravagance, though that was overwhelming, but because of the thoughtfulness. Dominic had chosen options that were beautiful, but not overly revealing. Sophisticated, but not intimidating. Clothes that would make me feel confident rather than out of place. The box contained 3 pairs of shoes, all with sensible heels I could actually walk in. Again, practical and thoughtful in a way I wouldn't have expected from a man in his position. "Mommy, are those princess dresses?" Emma had wandered in from the living room, her eyes wide as she touched the emerald silk reverently. "Kind of," I said, wiping away a stray tear before she could see it. "Mr. Dominic sent them for me to wear tomorrow." Emma nodded sagely. "He does make you smile." She looked up at me with innocent wisdom. "I told Nonna Petrovich that I think he likes you. She said he looks at you like you're gelato and he's been in the desert." A startled laugh escaped me at her blunt assessment and Mrs. Petrovich's colorful analogy. "Did she now?" Emma nodded again. "She says it's good that a man wants to take care of you for a change, that you work too hard." She touched the dresses again. "I think you should wear the green one. It matches your eyes, like mine." "That's a good choice," I agreed, touched by her certainty. "Now, back to your movie while I finish up in here." After tucking Emma into bed that night, I sat on my own bed, the emerald dress laid out beside me. Mrs. Petrovich's words, filtered through Emma's innocent repetition, echoed in my mind. A man who wanted to take care of me. When was the last time anyone had wanted to take care of me? I'd been so busy taking care of everyone else. Emma, my elderly neighbors, even my customers at Luigi's, that the idea of someone wanting to shoulder some of that burden was both alluring and terrifying. Especially when that someone was Dominic Russo, a man whose world was so different from mine, whose power and influence were frightening in their scope. Yet there was something about him that called to me. Not just the obvious attraction, though that was undeniable, but the way he looked at me like he saw beyond the exhausted waitress, beyond the struggling single mother, the way he treated Emma with genuine kindness and respect, the way he seemed to understand my pride even as he tried to help without wounding it. Tomorrow night, I would step into his world fully for the first time. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, as I finally drifted off to sleep, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. The next day passed in a blur of nervous energy. I deep-cleaned the apartment, helped Emma with her reading practice, and spent far more time than usual on my appearance. By the time 7 o'clock approached, I was ready, the emerald dress fitting as if it had been made for me, my hair swept up in a simple but elegant style. "You look like a princess," Emma declared from where she sat on my bed, watching me apply the final touches of makeup. "Thank you, sweetheart." I turned to her, suddenly anxious. "You're sure you're okay staying with Mrs. Petrovich tonight?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "She's making pierogi and letting me watch Frozen again." The doorbell rang, and my heart jumped into my throat. That's probably her now. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Mrs. Petrovich. It was Dominic, standing in my dingy hallway like an apparition from another world, holding a small bouquet of white roses and looking at me as if he'd never seen anything more beautiful. "Sophia," he said, my name a caress on his lips. "You are breathtaking." In that moment, with Dominic's eyes on me, I felt truly seen for the first time in years, not as a waitress, not as a struggling single mother, but as a woman, desirable and worthy of attention. "Thank you," I managed, accepting the roses. Their subtle fragrance filled the small entryway, elegant and understated. "I didn't expect you to come up. I wanted to," he said simply. His gaze moved past me as Emma appeared in the doorway to my bedroom, curious about our visitor. "Hi, Mr. Dominic," she called, waving enthusiastically. His expression softened as it always did around my daughter. "Hello, Emma. Are you having a special night too?" She nodded vigorously. "Nonna Petrovich is making pierogi and we're watching Frozen." "That sounds wonderful," he replied with complete sincerity, as if a 5-year-old's evening plans were as important as any business deal. A knock at the still open door announced Mrs. Petrovich's arrival. The elderly woman's eyes widened when she saw Dominic, then darted between us with poorly concealed interest. "So, this is the gentleman," she said, her heavy Polish accent making the words sound like both an accusation and approval. She extended a gnarled hand to Dominic. "Irina Petrovich." To my surprise, Dominic bent over her hand with old-world courtesy, murmuring something in what sounded like fluent Polish. Mrs. Petrovich's weathered face broke into a delighted smile. A man who speaks the mother tongue, and with such good manners. She turned to me with a decisive nod. This one is better than the last. Much better. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, but Dominic merely smiled, seemingly unruffled by her blunt assessment. After gathering Emma's things and giving her a kiss goodbye, we left the apartment. Dominic's hand rested lightly at the small of my back as we descended the stairs, a gentle pressure that felt both protective and possessive. "Your neighbor approves of me," he commented with a hint of amusement as we reached the street where his car waited. "Mrs. Petrovich approves of anyone who speaks Polish and has good manners," I replied, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. The elderly woman had an uncanny knack for reading people, a skill honed through surviving both Nazi occupation and Soviet rule before immigrating to America. The car ride passed in comfortable conversation, Dominic asking about my day, about Emma's favorite books, about small things that most men wouldn't think to inquire about. He listened to my answers with genuine interest, as if my mundane life was somehow fascinating to him. We arrived at a restaurant I'd never heard of, a discreet establishment with no sign, just an unmarked door, where a valet appeared immediately to take the car. Inside, the space was intimate and elegant, with only about a dozen tables, each set far enough apart to ensure privacy. The maitre d' greeted Dominic by name, leading us to a corner table that offered a view of both the entire restaurant and the Chicago skyline beyond the windows. "This place isn't in any guidebooks," Dominic explained as we were seated. "The chef only serves people he approves of. Getting a reservation can take months, unless you know the right people." "And you're the right people," I said. Not a question, but a statement. His lips quirked in a half-smile. "In this case, yes." No menus appeared. Instead, the chef himself emerged from the kitchen to discuss our preferences, his manner deferential toward Dominic, but warm and welcoming to me. Wine appeared, a rich Italian red that tasted like velvet, and then a progression of dishes began to arrive, each one more exquisite than the last. "How did you get started?" I asked after our first course, genuinely curious about the man across from me. "In your business." Dominic's expression remained neutral, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise at my directness, perhaps, or appreciation for it. "My father was in the same line of work," he said after a moment. "It was expected that I would follow him." He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving mine. "When he was killed when I was 17, I had little choice. My mother and sisters needed protection." The matter-of-fact way he spoke of such violence sent a chill through me, a reminder of the world he inhabited, the world I was now brushing against. "You had sisters?" I asked, noting his use of past tense. "Have," he corrected. "They live in Italy now. Safer that way. My mother passed 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," I said softly. He inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Family is everything, Sophia. It's why I understand your devotion to Emma. The lengths you would go to protect her. She's never had anyone but me," I admitted. "Her father." I hesitated, then decided that after everything, Dominic deserved the truth. His name was Ryan Callahan. He worked at the investment firm where I was a receptionist before Emma. When I told him I was pregnant, he offered me money for an abortion. When I refused, he had me fired and disappeared. Dominic's expression darkened, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "This man, does he still work there?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I haven't checked. It doesn't matter anymore." "It matters," Dominic said, his voice low and controlled, but with an undercurrent of anger that made me shiver. "Men should take responsibility for their children." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "Promise me you won't do anything. Emma and I have moved on. We're better without him." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. Finally, he nodded. "As you wish." The rest of dinner passed more lightly, conversation flowing easily between us. Dominic told me about growing up in Chicago's Little Italy, about his mother's cooking, about summers spent visiting relatives in Sicily. I shared stories about Emma's first steps, about my dreams of going back to school someday, about the novel I'd been writing in fragments late at night when I couldn't sleep. "I'd like to read it," he said, surprising me. "Your novel." I laughed, embarrassed. "It's not very good," I doubt that. His expression was serious. You have a way with words, Sophia. I've noticed it in how you speak, in the little notes you leave for Emma in her lunchbox. I blinked, startled. How did you? The day of the doctor's appointment, he explained. Emma showed me the note you'd left for Mrs. Petrovich to give her at lunch. A little poem about being brave. The fact that he'd noticed such a small thing, that he'd remembered it, touched me deeply. This dangerous man with his empire of power and fear had paid attention to a scribbled note meant only for my daughter's eyes. After dinner, instead of taking me straight home, Dominic asked if I'd like to see the city. We ended up at the lakefront, walking along the water's edge as the lights of Chicago sparkled around us. The night was cool, and he draped his suit jacket over my shoulders, the fabric still warm from his body and carrying his scent, sandalwood, and something uniquely him. I come here sometimes to think, he said as we paused to look out at the dark water. The lake reminds me that some things endure, no matter what changes around them. I glanced up at his profile, strong and sharp against the city lights. Is your world changing? He turned to face me fully. Since I met you? Completely. The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. We stood close enough that I could feel the heat from his body, see the flecks of amber in his dark irises. Sophia. My name was a whisper on his lips. I'm not a good man. I've done things I can never undo. My world is dangerous, and bringing you into it puts you at risk. I should walk away. But you won't, I said, somehow certain. No. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch feather light. I won't. I can't. Not unless you ask me to. In that moment, I knew I should be afraid. Of him. Of his world. Of the danger he represented. Instead, I felt a strange sense of safety. As if after years of struggling alone, I'd found a harbor in the most unexpected storm. I don't want you to walk away, I admitted, my voice barely audible over the lapping of the water. His eyes darkened, and then he was kissing me, gently at first, a question more than a demand. When I responded, leaning into him, the kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and primal that made my knees weak. His arms encircled me, strong and secure, holding me as if I were something precious. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. I should take you home. The reluctance in his voice mirrored my own feelings, but we both knew Emma was waiting. And this, whatever was happening between us, was too new, too fragile to rush. The ride back to my apartment was charged with unspoken words and lingering touches, his hand holding mine, my head occasionally resting against his shoulder. Outside my building, he walked me to the door, the perfect gentleman despite the desire I'd felt in his kiss. When can I see you again? He asked, his fingers intertwining with mine. Tomorrow? I suggested, surprising myself with my eagerness. Emma has been asking to go to the shed aquarium. Maybe you could join us. His smile was immediate and genuine. I'd like that very much. 6 months later, Emma and I moved out of our cramped apartment into a spacious brownstone in a safer neighborhood. Dominic had offered one of his own properties, but I'd insisted on something I could eventually afford on my own. A compromise he'd respected, though I knew he'd arranged for a significant discount on the rent. With his encouragement, I'd enrolled in night classes at the community college, working toward an English degree. During the day, instead of waitressing, I worked as an administrative assistant at a small publishing house, a job that mysteriously opened up just when I needed it. Dominic became a fixture in our lives, having dinner with us several times a week, taking Emma to the park, reading stories at bedtime when he stayed late. He was careful never to overstep, always reinforcing that I was Emma's mother, that my decisions for her were final. To the outside world, he remained Dominic Russo, the feared Mafia boss of Chicago's North Side. But to us, he was just Dominic, the man who looked at me like I hung the moon, who carried Emma on his shoulders at the zoo, who kissed me in the kitchen when he thought no one was looking. The danger of his world never entirely disappeared. There were still men who watched our house, still precautions we had to take. Once, he disappeared for 3 days with no explanation, returning with a healing cut along his jawline that he refused to discuss. I learned not to ask about certain aspects of his business, and he never brought that darkness home to us. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, and Emma finally asleep after the excitement of hanging stockings. Dominic knelt in front of me by the fireplace of our new home. The ring he offered was elegant, but not ostentatious. A perfect oval diamond flanked by emeralds that matched my eyes. "I can't promise you a normal life," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I can promise that you and Emma will always be protected, always be loved, always be my priority. I want to build a family with you, Sophia. If you'll have me." Tears blurred my vision as I looked at this complicated man who had transformed my life. "Yes," I whispered. "We'll have you." Later that night, as we lay tangled together in the darkness, his arms secure around me, I thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought us together, how a chance assignment to the wrong section at Luigi's had led me to a man I never would have met otherwise. A man who saw past the exhausted waitress to the woman beneath. "What are you thinking?" Dominic murmured, his lips against my hair, that sometimes the most unexpected customers turn out to be the most important. I replied, nestling closer into his embrace. His soft laughter rumbled against my ear. "I was never just a customer, Sophia. From the first moment I saw you, you were it for me, the beginning and end of everything." As I drifted toward sleep in the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago, the man who would soon be my husband, who already was Emma's devoted protector, I knew that our story was anything but conventional, but it was ours, built on unlikely circumstances and undeniable connection. He had watched me every night from that corner table, but now I could watch over him too, guiding him toward the light, even as he shielded us from the darkness. Together, we had found something neither of us expected, not just passion or protection, but a family, forged in the most unlikely of circumstances, and stronger for the trials that had brought us together. And as Dominic's breathing deepened in sleep, his body curled protectively around mine, I knew with absolute certainty that what had begun with a mafia boss watching a waitress had transformed into something much more powerful, a love strong enough to build a future neither of us had dared to imagine before.